All right, folks, buckle up. It's time for another deep dive, and today we're tackling a blog post that's just dripping with attitude.
Ooh, sounds juicy.
You bet it is. It's called, wait for it, Why I'm Not Annoying You at 6 p.m. Today.
Okay, I'm intrigued already.
Right, and get this, it's written by none other than slam poet extraordinaire Stephen Pinkwart.
Oh, Stephen Pinkwart. I've heard of this guy. Isn't he known for being a bit, shall we say, provocative?
That's putting it mildly. This guy loves pushing buttons, and this blog post is no exception. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's set the stage a bit. The whole thing is actually sparked by, a tiny little incident.
Oh, do tell.
Stephen posted his podcast, and he was like 1 minute late.
1 minute? Seriously, that's what he's writing a whole blog post about.
I know, right? You'd think the world was ending. But here's the thing. It wasn't some technical glitch.
I see where this is going.
This was a calculated move, a deliberate act of rebellion. Stephen Pinkwart doesn't do anything by accident. He's using this 1 minute delay as a springboard to launch into a whole manifesto about the importance of surprise in performance, particularly in the world of slam poetry.
So he's making a point about the power of disrupting expectations. I like it.
Exactly. And it's actually pretty brilliant when you think about it. We're so used to everything being on schedule, everything being predictable, especially in this digital age. So when something as simple as a 1 minute delay happens, it throws us off balance. It makes us pay attention.
It's like a little jolt to the system, reminding us that not everything has to follow a predetermined script.
Precisely. And that's exactly what Stephen is getting at. He argues that predictability is the death of art. It's like listening to the same top 40 radio station playing the same songs every single day at 4 p.m. You know, the kind of music they pipe into dentist waiting rooms.
Oh, God, don't even get me started on dentist waiting room music. It's like auditory torture.
Right. It's mind-numbing. And Stephen argues that predictable art is the same way. It's boring, it's uninspired, it's the equivalent of elevator music.
And who wants to listen to elevator music for hours on end? I'd rather have a root canal.
Seriously. And, it's not just about being entertaining. Stephen believes that true art has the power to shake us out of our complacency, to make us think, feel, and question the world around us. And that's something that predictable art just can't do. It's too safe, too familiar, too comfortable. It doesn't challenge us. It doesn't provoke us. It doesn't make us grow.
So he's advocating for art that disrupts, art that surprises, art that makes us uncomfortable.
Precisely. And he's not afraid to use some pretty strong language to get his point across. He compares predictable slammers to, get this, clockwork machines.
Ouch. That's gotta sting.
Right. And he doesn't stop there. He also compares them to, and I quote, corporate meeting attendees.
Oh, man, that's brutal. But, there's a certain truth to it, isn't there? Corporate meetings are the epitome of predictability. It's all about following the agenda, sticking to the script, and avoiding any kind of spontaneity or creativity.
Exactly. And Stephen is arguing that slam poetry and art in general should be the antithesis of that. It should be about breaking free from the constraints of convention, about embracing the unexpected, about pushing boundaries and challenging expectations.
It's about being bold, being original, and being willing to take risks.
Right. And that's where his practical tips come in. Because, it's easy to say, don't be predictable. But how do you actually put that into practice? How do you create art that is truly surprising and captivating?
That's the million-dollar question. I'm dying to know what kind of advice he has to offer.
Well, let me tell you, his tips are anything but conventional. And the first one is, it's pure Stephen Pinkwart. He says, and I quote, be a damn troll.
Wait, what? He's telling people to be trolls? I mean, I know he's provocative, but that seems a bit extreme, even for him.
I know, right? Sounds crazy. But hold on, before you write him off as a complete anarchist, let's unpack what he means by this. He's not talking about being mean-spirited or intentionally hurtful.
Oh, good. Because that wouldn't be very artistic, would it?
Exactly. It's more about playing with expectations, about subverting the norms, about doing something that makes the audience go, what the heck just happened?
So it's about creating a sense of disruption, of unease, of, I don't know what's coming next, but I'm definitely intrigued.
Precisely. He talks about taking a sad story and injecting it with unexpected humor or exaggerating emotions to the point where the audience is whiplashed between laughter and tears.
It's like he's playing with our emotions, keeping us on the edge of our seats, wondering what crazy thing he's going to do next.
Exactly. And it's brilliant because it forces us to pay attention, to engage with the work on a deeper level, to think about things in a new way.
It's like he's saying, don't just sit there and passively consume this. Wake up. Think. feel, question everything.
I love it. It's so refreshing to hear someone advocating for art that is challenging, provocative, and maybe even a little bit dangerous.
I agree. It's a far cry from the safe, predictable, and frankly boring art that we're often bombarded with these days.
So there you have it, folks. Stefan Pinkwart's first practical tip for creating captivating slam poetry. Be a damn troll.
I'm not sure if I'm ready to embrace my inner troll just yet, but I'm definitely intrigued by this approach. What other gems of wisdom does our resident slam poet provocateur have for us?
Oh, he's just getting started. His next tip is a little, shall we say, unconventional. He calls it the beer and chips test.
The beer and chips test. Okay, now I'm really curious.
Right, and the name is pretty self-explanatory. He's basically suggesting that you read your work aloud while indulging in, well, some performance enhancers.
So we're talking about getting drunk and eating junk food while writing slam poetry, because that's a research method I can get behind.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Not quite. Well, maybe a little. But the point is, if your poem can survive the haze of a few beers and a handful of chips, then it's probably strong enough to withstand the pressure of a live audience.
Ah, I see. It's not about the actual beer and chips. It's about creating a less than ideal environment to test the resilience of your work.
Exactly. Because let's be real, not every slam poetry performance is going to take place in a hushed, attentive auditorium.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're performing in a noisy bar, competing with the chatter of the crowd and the clinking of glasses.
That's right. And if your poem is too delicate, too reliant on perfect delivery and a captive audience, it's going to fall flat.
So the beer and chips test is a way to make sure your poem can stand on its own 2 feet, even when the conditions aren't perfect.
Okay, I'm starting to see the wisdom in that. It's like a boot camp for your poetry. If it can survive a few beers and a bag of chips, it can survive anything.
Right. And it's also a great way to loosen up, have some fun, and maybe even spark some unexpected creativity.
All right, I'm on board with the beer and chips test, metaphorically speaking, of course, but I'm curious to hear what other unconventional wisdom Stefan has to offer. What's next on his list of slam poetry commandments?
Well, this next one might make some writers cringe a little bit. He says, write the ending first.
Wait, what? Isn't that completely backwards? Shouldn't you start at the beginning and work your way to the end?
That's what I thought. But Stefan's approach is all about reverse engineering the performance. He believes that by starting with the ending, the emotional climax, the mic drop moment, you can then craft every line, every beat, every word choice to build towards that powerful conclusion.
So instead of letting the poem flow organically, you're strategically crafting it to hit specific emotional beats.
Exactly. It's like a carefully choreographed dance of words designed to make the audience feel exactly what you want them to feel.
That's interesting. It's a very deliberate and strategic approach to writing. But isn't there a risk of sacrificing spontaneity? Of forcing the poem into a predetermined box?
There's definitely that risk. But for Stefan, it seems like the potential payoff is worth it. He believes that by knowing your destination, you can ensure that every step of the journey serves a purpose, that every word has a reason for being there.
So it's about having a clear vision of where you want to end up and then using every line, every pause, every word choice to guide the audience towards that destination. It's like building a roller coaster. You have to make sure the climb is worth the drop.
Exactly. And, this idea of starting with the ending isn't unique to slam poetry. It's actually a common technique used in storytelling across various mediums.
You're right. Think about movies, for example. The best filmmakers often have a clear idea of the ending they want to achieve before they even start shooting.
It's about crafting a narrative arc that builds towards a satisfying and impactful conclusion.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic behind this write the ending first approach. It's definitely unconventional, but it could lead to some really powerful and well-structured slam poetry. What else does Stefan have in store for us?
Well, his next tip is, and I'm not making this up, use pauses like a psychopath.
Use pauses like a psychopath. Okay, now that's just creepy.
Right. It's a pretty disturbing image. I'm picturing someone standing on stage staring blankly into the audience. Silence stretching on for an eternity. Everyone shifting uncomfortably in their seats.
It's like a psychological thriller waiting to happen. But I'm guessing he's using that provocative language for a reason. What's the real message here?
Well, he's definitely playing with our expectations, that's for sure. But he's actually talking about the importance of embracing silence. About using pauses, not just as a way to catch your breath, but as a tool to build tension, suspense, and even a bit of discomfort.
It's like weaponizing silence, turning it into a tool for manipulation.
Exactly. And, there's a whole psychological explanation for why silence is so powerful. Our brains are wired to seek patterns and predictability. So when we encounter silence, a break in the pattern, it triggers a sense of anticipation, even a bit of anxiety.
It's like our brains are saying, wait, what's happening? What's going to happen next?
Precisely. And that's what makes silence such an effective tool for performers. It creates a sense of suspense, of heightened awareness. And when used strategically, it can make the words that follow even more impactful.
So it's not just about stopping randomly mid-sentence. It's about crafting those pauses strategically to enhance the power of your words.
Exactly. It's like a composer using rests to create texture and tension in a musical score.
Okay, I'm starting to see the method to his madness, but how do you actually pull this off? Any tips from our resident slam poet guru on how to use pauses like well,
Well, he doesn't give specific instructions, but he emphasizes the importance of being deliberate and intentional with your pauses. It's about understanding the rhythm of your words, the flow of your performance, and using silence strategically to enhance the impact.
So it's about being mindful of the silence, not just filling it with nervous chatter or unnecessary words.
Exactly. It's about trusting the power of silence, allowing it to create space for reflection, anticipation, and emotional resonance.
I love that. It's like giving the audience a moment to catch their breath, to process what they've just heard, and to prepare for what's coming next.
And this idea of using silence strategically is not limited to slam poetry.
Yeah.
It's a valuable tool for any kind of performance, whether it's public speaking, acting, music, or even just having a conversation.
Absolutely. A well-placed pause can add emphasis, create drama, and convey a whole range of emotions without saying a word.
It's like the secret weapon of communication.
Well said. So what's next on Stefan's list of unconventional wisdom?
Well, his final tip is all about embracing the absurd. He says, use absurd comparisons.
Ah, yes. This is where Stefan's playful, mischievous side really shines through.
It's about ditching the tired old metaphors and similes and embracing the power of the unexpected, the surreal, the downright bizarre.
Exactly. Instead of saying love is like a rose, he suggests something like love is like an IKEA shelf. It looks simple until you lose the screws and everything falls apart.
Huh. Perfect example. It's funny, it's unexpected, and it actually makes you think about love in a new way.
And that's the beauty of an absurd comparison. It can jolt us out of our complacency, make us see the familiar in a new light, and even spark a moment of genuine insight.
It's like a mental tickle, a jolt of creative energy that wakes up our brains and makes us pay attention.
And, there's a scientific basis for this as well. When we encounter something unexpected, something that violates our expectations, our brains release dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward.
So absurd comparisons are not just entertaining, they're actually good for our brains.
Indeed. They're like mental vitamins, boosting our creativity and cognitive flexibility. And this idea of using absurd comparisons isn't limited to slam poetry. It's a technique that can be applied to any form of creative expression, from writing to music to visual art.
Right. Think about Salvador Dali's melting clocks or Pablo Picasso's cubist portraits.
Yeah.
They're all about challenging our perceptions of reality and presenting the world in a new and unexpected way.
Exactly. And, there's a certain liberation in embracing absurdity. It allows us to break free from the constraints of logic and reason and tap into a more playful, imaginative side of ourselves.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be silly, to be weird, to be wonderfully nonsensical.
Couldn't agree more. In a world that often feels too serious, too predictable, too constrained by rules and expectations, absurdity can be a breath of fresh air.
Well said. So there you have it, folks. Steven Pincourt's 5 practical tips for creating captivating slam poetry. Be a damn troll, use the beer and chips test, write the ending first, use pauses like a psychopath, and use absurd comparisons.
It's a recipe for slam poetry that's anything but conventional, but I have to admit, I'm intrigued.
Me too. And what's really fascinating is that these tips aren't just about slam poetry. They can be applied to any kind of creative expression, from writing to music to visual art to even just everyday conversation.
You're right. It's all about being bold, being original, and being willing to take risks.
Exactly. And before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to mention one more thing that Stefan recommends in his blog post.
Oh, what's that?
He has a book called Poetry Master that apparently goes even deeper into these ideas and offers even more practical advice for aspiring slam poets.
Sounds like a must-read for anyone who wants to master the art of slam poetry.
I think so too. And, even if you're not a slam poet, I think there's a lot to be learned from Stefan's unconventional approach to creativity. He's a reminder that art doesn't have to be predictable, it doesn't have to be safe, and it definitely doesn't have to be boring.
Well said. All right, I'm ready to dive into Poetry Master and see what other gems of wisdom Stefan has to offer.
Me too. But first, let's take a short break. We'll be back soon to explore the depths of Poetry Master and see what other unconventional wisdom Stefan has to offer. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, deep divers. So we left off with Stefan's blog post and his interesting practical tips for slam poetry.
Right. Be a damn troll, being the most memorable, if not slightly unsettling, piece of advice. But I have to admit, the guy knows how to grab your attention.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings us to his book, Poetry Master. You know, from the little glimpses we got in his blog post, this book seems like it's going to be a wild ride.
You think?
Yeah.
I'm kind of nervous to even crack it open. What if it's full of, like, instructions on how to build a troll army or something?
Haha, well, let's hope it's a bit more nuanced than that. But yeah, I'm expecting some serious, mind-bending, rule-breaking stuff in there.
Well, before we dive into the book itself, let's circle back to this whole being a minute late thing. I mean, it's one thing to talk about disrupting expectations on stage, but isn't being deliberately late just, well, kind of rude?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. But I think there's more to it than that. Remember, Stefan's all about playing with expectations, and in today's world, we expect everything to be on time, every event to start promptly, every podcast to drop right on schedule.
It's true, we become slaves to the clock.
So, by being even a minute late, he's already messing with our heads, making us question those assumptions. It's a subtle but powerful way of saying, hey, I'm not playing by your rules.
You know what? I think you're right. It's like he's challenging the very fabric of our time-obsessed culture.
Exactly. And, you know, this idea of punctuality being a virtue is actually a relatively recent invention. In many cultures, time is seen as more fluid, less rigid.
That's a good point. So maybe Stefan is just tapping into a different way of relating to time, a way that's less about adhering to strict schedules and more about embracing spontaneity and the unexpected.
I think you're onto something there. And, you know, it's not just about time. He's also challenging our expectations about what slam poetry should be. It's not just about rhyming words and pretty metaphors. It's about raw emotion, honesty, and as he puts it, being a damn troll.
So it's not enough to just have technical skill. You also need to have a certain attitude, a willingness to push buttons to make people uncomfortable.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Stefan so compelling. He's not afraid to challenge the status quo, to make people think, to make them feel something, even if it's a little bit of discomfort. He's not just entertaining us. He's making us question our own assumptions about the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see the method to his madness. But I'm still a little wary of this whole be a damn troll thing. How does that translate into actual performance techniques?
Well, he talks about using exaggeration, both in terms of emotions and language. It's about taking a simple idea and amplifying it, distorting it, making it larger than life.
So it's not just about being outrageous for the sake of it. It's about using those over-the-top elements to highlight a deeper truth, a hidden meaning.
Precisely. It's like using a magnifying glass to focus the audience's attention on a specific point, even if it's a point that they might not want to see.
Interesting. It's like he's saying, I'm going to make you look at this, whether you like it or not.
Exactly. And sometimes the best way to get people to pay attention is to shake them out of their complacency, to make them a little bit uncomfortable.
Well, he's certainly achieved that with this blog post. All right, I'm ready to move on to his next tip, the beer and chips test. I have to admit, I'm still not entirely convinced that this is a legitimate writing technique.
Yeah, it sounds more like an excuse to indulge in some guilty pleasures. But remember, it's not about the actual beer and chips. It's about creating a less than ideal environment to test the resilience of your work.
Right, it's like putting your poem through boot camp.
Exactly. Can it survive being read aloud while you're slightly distracted? Maybe a little tipsy? Definitely craving some salty snacks.
Because let's be honest, real life is full of distractions. If your poem can hold its own in that kind of chaotic environment, then it's probably got something special going on.
Precisely. It's not just about sounding good in your head or on paper. It's about connecting with an audience that might not be giving you their undivided attention.
Okay, I'm getting it now. It's about creating work that's strong enough to cut through the noise, both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. It's about being memorable, impactful, and, dare I say, irresistible, even when the conditions aren't perfect.
All right, I'm sold on the beer and chips test. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Responsible artistry and all that. But let's move on to his next tip, which is write the ending first. This one still has me scratching my head a bit.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But think about it this way. If you know where you're going, you can craft the journey more effectively.
So it's about having a destination in mind, a clear vision of the emotional impact you want to create.
Exactly. And then you can work backwards, building each line, each stanza, to lead the audience towards that powerful conclusion.
So it's less about spontaneity and more about strategy.
I think it's a balance of both. You still need to be open to inspiration and allow the poem to evolve organically, but having that ending in mind gives you a framework, a roadmap to guide you.
Interesting. It's like building a house. You don't just start laying bricks randomly. You have a blueprint to guide you.
Exactly. And that blueprint, in this case, is the emotional impact you want to create with your poem.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light. But let's move on to his next tip, which is probably the most controversial and intriguing of them all. Use pauses like a psychopath.
Ah, yes, the infamous psychopath tip. It's definitely attention-grabbing, but it's also a bit unnerving. What do you think he's really getting at here?
Well, I think he's trying to make us think about silence in a different way. We tend to think of pauses as just a break in the flow of speech, a moment to catch our breath. But Stephen is arguing that silence can be just as powerful as words, maybe even more so.
It's about using silence strategically to create tension, suspense, and even a bit of discomfort.
It's like holding your breath underwater. The longer you hold it, the more intense the anticipation becomes. And then when you finally come up for air, that breath feels so much more precious.
That's a great analogy, and there's a whole science behind this. When we encounter silence, it triggers a primal response in our brains. We're wired to seek patterns and predictability, so a sudden break in the flow of sound can be jarring, even unsettling.
It's like our brains are saying, wait, what's happening? What's going to happen next?
Exactly. And that's what makes silence such a powerful tool for performers. It creates a sense of anticipation, of heightened awareness. And when used skillfully, it can make the words that follow even more impactful.
So it's not just about being quiet. It's about using silence as a deliberate and calculated element of your performance.
Precisely. It's about knowing when to hold back, when to let the silence speak for itself, and when to break the tension with a well-placed word or phrase.
Okay, I'm starting to see the power of the pause. But I have to admit, I'm a little intimidated by the thought of using it effectively.
Well, don't worry. It takes practice. Like any skill, it requires a certain level of mastery and finesse.
I guess the key is to be intentional and strategic, not just random and awkward.
Exactly. Think about the rhythm of your words, the emotional beats you want to hit, and use silence to amplify those moments.
It's like composing a piece of music, using rests to create texture and tension.
That's a great way to think about it. So, are you ready to embrace your inner psychopath and start wielding the power of the pause?
I'm not sure about the psychopath part, but I'm definitely willing to experiment with using silence more intentionally in my own work. And speaking of experimentation, let's move on to Stefan's final practical tip, which is use absurd comparisons. Now, this one I can definitely get behind.
Me too. This is where Stefan's playful side really comes out to play. He's encouraging us to ditch the tired old metaphors and similes and embrace the power of the unexpected, the surreal, the downright bizarre.
Instead of saying love is like a rose, he suggests something like, love is like an IKEA shelf. It looks simple until you lose the screws and everything falls apart.
Ah, I love that. It's funny, it's relatable, and it actually makes you think about love in a new way. And that's the beauty of an absurd comparison. It can be a gateway to a deeper truth, a hidden meaning that might not be accessible through more conventional language.
It's like he's using humor to sneak past our defenses, to make us confront uncomfortable truths that we might otherwise avoid.
And there's a scientific basis for this as well. When we encounter something unexpected, something that violates our expectations, our brains release dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. So absurd comparisons aren't just entertaining, they're actually good for our brains.
I knew there was a reason I loved them so much. But seriously, I think absurd comparisons are such a powerful tool for writers and performers because they force us to see the world in a new light. They jolt us out of our complacency and make us pay attention.
Exactly. And they can also be a lot of fun to come up with. It's like a game trying to find the most outlandish, unexpected comparison possible.
It's like a mental workout for your creativity muscles. So there you have it, folks. Stefan Pinkwart's 5 practical tips for creating captivating slam poetry. Be a damn troll, use the beer and chips test, write the ending first, use pauses like a psychopath, and use absurd comparisons.
It's a recipe for slam poetry that's Anything but conventional, but I have to admit, I'm intrigued. What do you say we take a closer look at his book, Poetry Master, and see if he elaborates on these ideas?
I'm game. Let's dive in and see what other treasures await us in this unconventional guide to slam poetry.
Okay, so we've talked about Stefan's, let's say, unique approach to slam poetry, but his book, Poetry Master, promises like actual guidance.
Yeah, pure hard-hitting guidance, apparently. So, is it living up to the hype?
Well, it's definitely not your typical poetry how-to book. Like, forget flowery language and sonnets. This is all about raw, visceral slam.
Okay, so less Wordsworth, more word punch.
Exactly. Stefan really emphasizes the importance of writing texts that are, like, emotionally charged.
Right, so it's not enough to just string words together. You got to make the audience feel something.
Absolutely. He talks about tapping into those, like, deep, raw emotions and translating them into words that hit the audience right in the gut.
So vulnerability is key, like bearing your soul on stage.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mhm.
And he doesn't shy away from the performance aspect either. He talks a lot about, like, dominating the stage.
Dominating the stage. Sounds intense.
Oh, it is. He's all about using your voice, your body, your energy to command the attention of the audience.
So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it.
Exactly. He talks about creating a presence that's, like, captivating and compelling so people can't tear their eyes away from you.
Okay, I can see how that would be important for slam poetry. It's such a dynamic and energetic art form.
Yeah.
But doesn't that take a lot of confidence? I mean, not everyone is comfortable being the center of attention.
True. But that's where Stefan's whole philosophy comes in.
Yeah.
It's about embracing those uncomfortable feelings and turning them into fuel for your performance.
So it's about channeling that nervous energy into something powerful and expressive.
Exactly. It's about owning the stage, owning your words, and owning your emotions.
Okay, that makes sense. But it also sounds kind of scary, like putting yourself out there so completely with no guarantees of how the audience will react.
Yeah, there's definitely a risk involved. But Stefan argues that the potential payoff is huge. He believes that when we're truly vulnerable, when we drop our defenses and allow ourselves to be seen, that's when we create the most powerful connections with an audience.
It's like the more you risk, the more you stand to gain.
Exactly. It's about trusting yourself, trusting your voice, and trusting the audience to connect with your authenticity.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal of this approach. It's not just about slam poetry, it's about life, isn't it? About being brave enough to be ourselves, even when it's scary.
I think you hit the nail on the head. And you know, it all comes back to that question we posed earlier. Would you rather be the artist everyone loves or the artist everyone remembers?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, who doesn't want to be loved? But being remembered, that implies something more lasting, more impactful.
Exactly. And I think Stefan, with his, let's call it unconventional approach, is definitely aiming to be remembered.
Right. He's not afraid to ruffle feathers, to push buttons, to make people think and feel things they might not expect. And that's what makes his work so compelling.
It's about leaving a mark, making a difference, sparking a conversation. It's about being more than just entertainment. It's about being an experience.
Well said. So if you're looking for a safe, predictable, cookie-cutter approach to slam poetry, Poetry Master is definitely not the book for you. But if you're ready to embrace the chaos, to unleash your inner troll, to dominate the stage with raw emotion and unapologetic authenticity, then this might be just the guide you need.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Be creative, Stefan.
And until next time, folks, keep diving deep.